This is section 11.3. It's on arcs and chords. The first theorem in this section is theorem 11.4. And here's what it says. In a circle or in congruent circles, two minor arcs are congruent if and only if their corresponding chords are congruent. So first thing I want to point out is this is a biconditional, meaning it's actually two theorems in one. It means the same thing left to right as it does right to left. So they're telling you if you have two chords, that doesn't look too good. Let's say you have this purple chord and this purple chord. You can say that those chords or those arcs are congruent if the chords are congruent. So the chords being these segments here. If those segments are congruent, then the purple arcs are congruent. And vice versa. If you knew that the arcs were congruent, then the corresponding chords would be congruent. So we're going to use that theorem a lot in this section. We'll look at two more examples in this video. Here's your first one. The vertices of an equilateral triangle, we're going to call it JKL, are located on circle P. Identify all congruent minor arcs. So if this is an equilateral triangle, that means these segments are congruent. And from theorem 11.4, if you have congruent chords, then the corresponding arcs are congruent. So that purpley looking arc, this blue arc, and then we'll go with a green arc. Those arcs have to be congruent. I'll take a second and put some slash marks on them too so you can see that they're congruent. So that's a good way to identify them, but you can also name them if you wanted to. Arc JL is congruent to arc KL, and that's congruent to arc JK. That's how you would write it. In example 2, they're telling you the vertices of an isosceles triangle, call it triangle XYZ, are located on circle R. If segment XY is congruent to segment YZ, identify all of your congruent arcs. So this triangle being isosceles, there's at least two sides congruent. We don't know if the third side matches. It's not equilateral like the last example. So the two arcs that are congruent would be, I'll make that guy blue, and I'll make this guy that purpley color. Those arcs have to be congruent. So that's a good way to identify them, but you can also name them too. Knowing the language is important. Arc ZY is congruent to arc XY. In our next video, we'll look at another theorem.